Welcome to Investing in Integrity. I'm Ross Overline, CEO and co-founder of Scholars of Finance, a rapidly growing organization on a mission to inspire character and integrity in the finance leaders of tomorrow. If you're an investor, finance professional, or student aspiring to make an impact with capital, this show is for you. Investing in Integrity brings you conversations with leading minds in finance to help you learn how you can make finance a force for good by investing in integrity. On today's episode, we had an incredible conversation with Britt Harris. Britt Harris is a legendary, renowned investor with over 40 decades of investing leadership experience. He has managed portfolios worth over $500 billion. He's advised on over $3 trillion of transactions. He has an incredibly illustrious career, too many achievements to name, including 3 Lifetime Achievement Awards from different industry groups in finance. Britt was at one point the CEO and CIO at UTIMCO, the largest endowment in America with over $70 billion. He was also formerly a CEO at Bridgewater Associates and at Verizon Investment Management Corporation, along with many other roles that he's held. Interestingly, Britt, 20 years ago, started a class at the University of Texas, Austin called Titans of Investing, very similar to Scholars of Finance, where he teaches cohorts at UT Austin and now at Texas A&M as well about being wise, virtuous leaders who aren't only high capacity, high ability, high technical skill, but who are high character and who have wisdom. As you might imagine, given our work here at Scholars of Finance, we are huge fans of Britt and his work with Titans. I was really fortunate this year to actually go and join his first day of his Titans class this spring at UT Austin and meet his students, 2 of whom were in Scholars of Finance at UT Austin as well, and had a wonderful time with Britt. Britt has become a mentor that I really value and cherish. He has an incredible, extensive network. We recently interviewed Howard Marks on our podcast. Britt's a close friend of Howard's, and I actually mentioned Britt in my interview with Howard. If you haven't given that a listen yet, even before this call today, Britt was just having lunch with Ray Dalio before this interview when it was taped. Britt has probably the most powerful network of financial titans in the world supporting him and his Titans program. And we're so grateful that he supports Scholars of Finance and that he continues to invest in us and our community. So Britt, if you're listening to this, thank you. For everyone else, I found this interview incredibly inspiring and really insightful, and I hope you find it as useful as I did. We cover a range of topics. First, we get to hear a very brief summary of Britt's career, which he miraculously summarizes in like less than 3 minutes. We get to then dive right into leadership. Britt's definitions of leadership, the key characteristics he thinks that leaders need to have. We talk about the leadership responsibility that finance and investing executives, both senior and junior, have today amidst a very rapidly changing economic and geopolitical environment. We talk a lot about the importance of having a single source of truth for your ethics, what's right, what's wrong. We also talk about the importance of doing the deep work to cultivate virtues like humility, excellence, integrity, to cultivate wisdom, so that when hard times come, we know how to respond as leaders. And Britt ends us with a really powerful call to action to speak the truth with love. And he'll unpack that more. So I'm really excited for you to listen to the conversation. Britt, it was just wonderful. Without further delay, here is Britt Harris. Britt Harris, sir, it is such a pleasure and an honor to have you on the Investing in Integrity podcast today. I've really been looking forward to this conversation to seek wisdom from you and have you share your wisdom about leadership in finance and investing with our community. And there's so much ground to cover. You've had many decades in the industry, and I'd love to start out with, how are you doing and where are you calling in from?
I'm doing well. I'm 67 years old now, and it's every year gets better and better. I've got new hips, so I like a Superman. And right now I'm in Danbury, Connecticut, 10 minutes away from one of my sons with my 3 granddaughters in a beautiful cottage out in the
Wonderful.
forest.
Amazing. Britt, thank you so much for hopping on today for the interview while you're out there in Connecticut. Britt, I would love to kick us off with you just sharing a summary of your life story and your journey with our listeners.
Sure, happy to. And by the way, Ross, I've been looking forward to this. I think a lot of your organization, when you're 40, 50 years into your career, it's hard to have a short summary of your career. But so I'll just give a list of things so people can know. I've been a CIO or CEO for 8 different investment firms. I've managed over $500 billion, in my life. Me and others have probably created $3 trillion of new investment product that people are buying all over the world. I'm the only executive who has been a CEO for in all the major asset categories, meaning Verizon for corporate, Texas Teachers for public, Bridgewater for hedge funds, and Utemco, which manages the money for Texas A&M, University of Texas, and MD Anderson Hospital. I've been on the advisory boards for the New York Stock Exchange and for Dallas, the Dallas Fed. I was on the President's Working Council for Financial Markets during the Bush administration. I've been an advisor to 5 different countries: Japan, China, France, Germany, and the UK. Believe it or not, and this is because the stakes were much lower, I was named a top 25 investor in America when I was 28. I have 3 Lifetime Achievement Awards, which means if you need one or have a friend, I've got a couple of extras. And along with all that, created a class called Titans of Investing, which is a highly unique class. I've now taught that for 20 years. You have 1,000 graduates that really are focused on the type of thing you're talking about: high ability, high integrity. And they're in 35 different states and 14 different countries. They've created 41 businesses that have a value of over $5 billion. And believe it or not, this is full service, 41 marriages. So it's been a good life so far. Been very blessed.
Britt, you opened by saying that it's difficult to summarize a 40-year career plus your career briefly, but wow, you did. That was more concise than I've been able to be, and my career has been a fraction of the length and not anywhere nearly as impressive. Thank you for sharing the high level of a number of your accomplishments. I've been looking forward to this conversation so much because, like you mentioned, your program, Titans of Investing, there's a lot of similarities between what you're doing with Titans and Investing and what we've been building at Scholars of Finance. I've really considered you one of the most important people I can learn from in building Scholars of Finance because you spent 20 years trying to teach people with high ability and high integrity. I wanted to ask if you can maybe kick us off today talking about leadership and what leadership really means, the definition of a leader as you see it.
Oh, of course, I'd love to. I want to say just a couple more things about the path before we do that. If you'd asked me, for instance, how did you learn all this? My answer would be, I've had a lot of help from a lot of people, but I learned it on the bus. And what does that mean? It means when I got my first break to manage a portfolio, I didn't know anything at all. You don't even realize how much you don't know. Then when you get older, you realize, wow, there's a lot of stuff that I don't know. But I was in a great situation where I had a bus ride in, hour, and let's say you're coming in, you're a public equity manager. What is a public equity manager? Then I listen all day long to people who were already experienced. And then I drive home. And then the next day it might be a venture capital. The next day it might be a private equity. The next might be a value or a bond manager, whatever it was. It was 3 years of preparation, listening, review, preparation, listening, review in an active situation. And I just think that's key to say because nothing happens without solitude and concentration over a long period of time. And there are no really savants that just start out knowing everything. The leadership in the class. The reason I started the class was because I felt like there's a breakdown in America with regard to really strong, wise, high integrity leadership. Now, of course, there's always plenty of people that have those characteristics, but this was in a period of time when we had the WorldCom situation, we had the Enron situation, and just a story, personal story, like the one of the companies I was working for at in that period was acquired by a European company, and immediately that European company fired every single person in our company with except for me and the HR guy. And the kept the HR guy to administer this thing, and they kept me not because I was anything special per se, but they just didn't have anything liked me in the company and they needed what I could do. But so one day we were about to have a party for all the people who have been let go, just a party for people who have been let go. And I had gotten up, I was leaving my office, and suddenly there's a person in my doorway and says, "Oh, but I'm glad I caught you before. I need you to sign this check." And I said, "No, I'm going to this party." And they said, "Well, it's really important." And it was a $20 million check for the CEO of our company who had led the company down to the abyss. So management or leadership is sacred. The relationship that you have with the people that work with you and work for you is not a casual, it's not a selfish thing. It is they're counting on you to lead them in the right way, to set an example for what needs to be done in the future, to eat your own cooking, to be the first one on the field whenever there's some kind of a problematic situation, and to have some kind of wisdom and empathy with what's going on. My last job before I went into this kind of situation, I was assigned to a service center because I was going into a senior management training program. I remember I was very young. And I'd come down from the ivory tower to this service center in Arlington, Texas. And immediately what I noticed was they were treating me like the golden child coming down from the mountain, not expecting much from me in terms of work, but just to act superior. And the man that had sent me down, the CEO of our company, I just noticed the incredible faith that they had in him. And since I knew him really well, I thought, man, no, there's probably no earthly being that really can match up with that kind of faith, but it was there nonetheless. And they were teaching me a lot, but I said, let me take what a safety meeting and teach you what I know, kind of an exchange. And I did that. And after that meeting, I was sitting there with the senior guys and they said something to me. They said, "Britt, I really hope you'll be the CEO of this company someday." And then when I saw the behavior of what was going on, and this was, I don't want anybody to think this was like across the board, but it was enough to get me motivated to try to make some changes. So I started a class. So you have to think about what can I offer that's valuable that's not already being done. My wife and I thought about it, got counsel about it, prayed about it, and studied about it in the whole 9 yards. And we came up with two things: wisdom and relationships. Everybody that I'm teaching, and it's highly competitive, but I know that they're all hard workers. I know that they're all ambitious, hopefully within healthy bounds. And I know that they're all very technically competent for their age. Work hard, ambitious, technically competent. And those are all good things and they're required things, but they're not sufficient. And there is something that's above that. What's above that is wisdom. And so the first thing is a leader needs to have wisdom, something beyond technical competence, something beyond just to be able to work harder, the wisdom to know, where to go and how to get there. And when the tough times come, you learn that. And the pandemic was, let's imagine you're a captain of a ship. If the weather's great and, the winds are down and, the captain can stay below and read his maps or her maps or can drink wine in moderation, of course, relax. And then the younger people, can run the ship. That's how they start to learn. But when the storm comes, when you really get hit hard by something that's threatening the entire operation, the captain has to go straight to the wheel. And everybody needs to see it because people they don't expect you to be perfect. This is an important thing for leaders. No one expects you to be perfect, but they expect you to be present. And they expect you to be able to take the wheel when the times are really the toughest. And they expect you to have enough confidence to let other people run the ship when you're in circumstances that, don't require the full scale of the captain. That's how people grow. And my definition of leadership evolves over time as you yourself change, your circumstances change, and as you learn more, make more mistakes, all those kind of things. It just gets clearer and clearer. And one of the things that's important as I speak is, and this is something you should probably ask everybody, what's your POV? POV stands for point of view. So I'm a Christian, so I have that point of view. So when I think about leadership, a leader is someone who brings life to wherever he or she goes. There's a scripture that says, enter by the narrow gate, for broad is the way, wide is the path, leads to destruction, and most take it. But narrow is the path, narrow is the way that leads to life, only a few find it. And so I want to be in that second category, not leading people towards destruction, but being led and leading my community, my family, the people that I work with, all the other designations that I have towards life. And you can apply that to, what is that? How does that fit into, I'm running a company. A company's either dying or maintaining or growing. And how many times do you go into a company that's literally dying and you need to bring it back to life? Maybe your department is struggling. It needs to be brought back to life. And that perspective gives purpose and also produces results. Were you ever around Mother Teresa? I was around her once. Most intimidating person I've ever been around in my life. And the President of the United States was there also. So there was a guy, I think it was from New Mexico, who got convicted about holiness. And he thought, how do I do that? And so the only picture he had of it was what Mother Teresa does. So to his credit, since that's all he knew, he did sell his company and he went to Calcutta. And after a few weeks, Mother Teresa approaches him, taps him on the shoulder, and can you imagine looking up at Mother Teresa? She says to him, sir, can I ask you what you're doing? And he gave the perfect answer, right? He said, Mother Teresa, I've sold everything and I've come here to work with you and the poorest of the poor. And you'd have to have been around Mother Teresa to see how this would match up. She said, can I give you my impression? Of course you can, Mother Teresa. Please, I want your impression. She said, here's my observation, sir. You're terrible at this. Go and find your own Calcutta. So every single one of us has a personal Calcutta. And when you see it that way, then your motivation, your inspiration, your desire to go there is super high. And all the energy you need, all the intellectual horsepower you need, all the support that you need eventually will start to show up. And so people will say, Britt, I have no idea. I have no idea, what my Calcutta is, my purpose in life. I think the answer to that question is that your Calcutta is right here, right now. Wherever you're going next, your family is your Calcutta. The people that you're interacting with right now are your Calcutta. It's not something that's out there that you can't really get your hands on. A leader is present, but he or she is also looking to the future. But it's missing the present that is typically the biggest problem. They should be thinking about, how can I maximize the situation that I'm in? Which leads to another strong characteristics of a leader, which is they're actually thinking about others more than they're thinking about themselves. You can't really be a leader that people are going to follow for very long if it's all about you. With that being true, sometimes a leader has to be willing to go it alone. I'll give you another example of a leader. So clear your mind, clear the mechanism. And maybe you've seen you'll see these videos, and what is just a bunch of people in a park, and they're just everywhere, and everybody's just doing their own thing. And all of a sudden, one person will stand up and start dancing.
Yeah, and then
That is the
3, and
leader.
then 10, and
Yeah.
then the whole park is now dancing suddenly.
Yes. And this is really important because you're asking me how leadership has changed. So one person is willing to stand up, even though nobody else will. They're not so concerned about what other people think. They're not too frightened to do something. They're not somebody who says, I got to have 100%, knowledge before I do this, or I've got to be a ballet dancer. They just are willing to stand up and just start dance on their own. And it's really awkward, right? Everybody just looks at that person and it's kind of a weird situation. But then you're not a leader if you don't have followers. The definition of leader is just somebody that people are willing to follow, because if nobody follows you, not a leader. But then the importance of that second person, that person who has enough faith in the leader that will just get up there and support. But then there's two of them and they're dancing around and still nothing happens. But then eventually the third person comes up and there's some mystery about this. Third person comes up and starts dancing, and then all the barriers break down. And as you pointed out, everybody comes. We're lacking the first person. We got a few people who are willing to be the second person. We got more people who are willing to be the third person, and of course, everybody's willing to be the person after that. But we don't have enough people who would be the first person. And when I see something that's wrong in the world, I'm going to say something. If something needs to get done, I'm going to be the one to step out and do it. And just the last thing is, or maybe one of the last things, is that there's lots of different styles of leaders. Every organization at different points in time may need a different style of leader. The one that I like the most, and the one that seems to be the most popular right now, is the servant leadership model. But you need a different leadership style in different situations. The leader has to be willing to make very difficult decisions. If they're smart, they can get counsel. A wise man has many counselors. But at the end of the day, it comes down to, what do they think? And when you get yourself in that situation, there are not many people who are willing to be in that position and then can execute that. That's a very difficult time, and nobody can do it perfectly all the time. But if you're not going to be willing to make difficult decisions, then you're not going to be a leader.
Britt, honestly, we could spend the rest of this interview just unpacking this first question and your answer. Thank you for sharing some of those key qualities and criteria of how you define leadership, what you look for in leaders. A lot of what you're sharing resonates personally. Before I knew about Britt Harris and Titans of Investing, I thought we were alone trying to create a new generation of principled future finance leaders, and was delighted to find that there's someone that's already been doing this for many years before we, some kids, some young guys, like had the idea, we thought, to do this. Listening to you share, I'm reflecting on the last few months with the new administration coming in. There's been a lot of change, a lot of really rapid change, right? And the markets, the geopolitical environment. And there were definitely times where I found myself as a leader wondering, what is our role in this, if any? Like, how do we support our students through this? Do I need to bring my voice into the conversation that's happening in the world right now? Or do I just put my blinders on and tune it out and just focus on our students and teaching these timeless virtues, right, to our students and equipping them and helping them form character? And one thing that I've come to believe is that real leaders, they look to others for wisdom, and they look to others for advice and for counsel. You're someone that I've gone to for advice and counsel. We've had prior podcast guests who are advisors, who are board directors, who I go to a lot for advice and counsel. I'm really curious, maybe asking on behalf of the entire financial industry, if I could be so bold as to even claim to have that. What would your advice and counsel be to finance and investing leaders today for how they're thinking about their responsibility to society, to the world, when the US government's being downsized? More responsibility is being placed on the private sector to drive American prosperity. If we balance our budget, $1 or $2 trillion less of spending from the American government, and the private sector will have to make up for that somehow and maintain economic growth and maintain prosperity, like I've said. Given all of the circumstances we find ourselves in today, what is your advice and counsel? What's the wisdom you would want to pass along to the financial executives listening today and to the young people listening as well?
There's a lot of different layers to that one. And I'll give you a big picture thing first. I'm old enough that I actually got to spend some time with John Templeton, the great investor. And it wasn't just me, and that we weren't bosom buddies or anything, but I was able to be with him a few times. And he passed along some counsel to me and the others, which I've tried to hold on to. And he was Sir John Templeton, so he said it much more eloquently than I'm about to say it. But essentially, he said this: Pessimists always sound smarter, but optimists live in bigger houses. It's so easy to get pessimistic and so hard to be optimistic. We're imbalanced on that. So it's important to realize it's way easier for people to be pessimistic. And then, of course, we have such a echo chamber now that pessimism sells. When you turn on the news, it's only news because something terrible that happened. The only thing people talk about are the terrible things that happen. They forget that a lot of wonderful things are also happening. So let me give you something practical. Ross, do you ever feel anxious?
Britt, this is unfair because you know me and you've been a mentor of mine. I feel anxious all the time. I'm always worried that SOF isn't going to grow and we're not going to transform the financial system and we're not deeply forming our students enough. And this could be the last year that everyone realizes they should stop donating. Yeah, I definitely feel plenty of anxiety.
Yeah, of course. And so the question is, does that anxiety help you to perform better?
It's an interesting question. I think it does. I definitely think there's like a marginal return curve where if anxiety gets too high, it actually disrupts performance. But there's definitely like that stress performance curve. I don't have a little bit of it. I'm just laying back on my couch, relaxing. When there's some anxiety, it's like it puts you to work. If there's too much, now I've got to do a bunch of things to curb my anxiety.
Okay, yeah. So I understand the point. We're going to refine it slightly in just a minute. But here's something that scientists will say, and it's true. When you're anxious, you cannot be grateful. You cannot hold anxiety and gratitude at the same time. Now, which of the two emotions is more productive? You want your mind to be in a position where you can be the most productive. And so it's important to be self-aware. And of course, I get anxious. Everybody gets anxious. But anxiety there's a thing called a mood elevator. And anxiety is moving you down the mood elevator. And as you move down the mood elevator, your decision making actually is reduced. Now, I understand you have to have some motivation. That's called adrenaline to get yourself going. I don't want to be somebody who's anxious and worried. I want to be somebody who's grateful and motivated. So when you're in a situation, that's the first thing that has to happen. Then you get motivated to a certain extent by that, but then you have to turn it into something positive. And then you offer whatever you can offer. Now, you're referring to a very specific situation. And this is, I think the whole country is thrown off by this a little bit, whether you agree with it or don't agree with it. The speed and the breadth of it is something we haven't seen before. But you know what? We've been in the country for quite a long time, and we've had all different kinds of things happen here or there. And we'll get through it. We'll survive it. We'll prosper from it. We'll make it good in the end. And rather than just panicking and complaining, and it's a big word, freaking out and being anxious and worrying about it, we have an amazing country here of 330 million people. That's an example of the world. And then, of course, we want to protect that. But it can survive anything as long as the people themselves stay focused on being productive and don't fracture into a million points of light and become unproductive. And you talked about people being displaced. So, what's going to happen to these folks? I'm not saying I know the answer to this, but I would say I'm one of the few who've worked as much in the government as privately. Now, I don't want to get too detailed here, but there's a productivity number associated with how you run the government as opposed to how you run free enterprise. One is profit oriented and around maximizing resources. The other is about optimizing the amount of money that you have, and it's all about expenses. So that's a kind of a weird answer. I don't know if that's a great one, but the main thing is the wrong answer is to get really upset about it and just go around and complain and think this thing is doomed. Just first of all, you don't know. We're only 2 months into it. Make your voice heard, but we can't have no matter who gets in the White House, we can't have half the country screaming this can never work. Be like having a football team and half the time your offense is really excited, but your defense just won't play. And then somebody else comes in and it's the reverse. That has to stop. That is not good citizenship. And if you're not working for a solution, then lower your complaining. So you asked specifically about the finance industry. And let's remember that we're not the most important industry in the country, but we are the lifeblood of almost every industry there is. We're the ones that are the clearing mechanism for financial resources. Resources are moving to where they need to go, that it's a fair system and it's efficient and adequate system. And we also are responsible for other people's money. If you go back to the great financial crisis, we had a breakdown there where the situation was things had started about 10 years earlier, and the government did a study, and the study showed if you're middle income, what's the difference between somebody who's middle income and somebody who's below middle income? And the biggest answer was the middle income people own a home. So the government said, all right, well, what we have to do is make it really easy for people to own homes, and then they can move into the middle income. In the beginning, the financial sector said, wait a minute, they have to be able to pay for these homes, both in the beginning and also over time. And the government said, you show me a time in history where the entire country had a decline in residential real estate, and they couldn't. This is where the term black sheep came from. Just because you've never seen one doesn't mean there's not one in the world. And so, without going into details, they forced the financial sector to allow these loans. Because if they didn't, they would penalize them. Now, the financial sector did not step up at that point and just say, we're not going to do this. People were behind on these loans within 3 to 6 months of this thing happening. And so instead of staying up and doing what's right, we capitulated. But we said, we're not going to hold these loans. If you're going to have us make loans that we don't think are going to pay, we'll just make the loans, take the commission, and sell them off to somebody else. When they do that, then the investors say, hey, wait a minute, my return used to be X and now it's slightly below X. I didn't sign up for this. So how can we fix that? Let's just lever it up. As an industry, it takes two to tango, and that caused one depression because we didn't really stand up for what was right, even though it was difficult at the time to do. Our job is to keep the financial system working and to be able to address whatever comes our way in a way that's professional and that is ethical and is fair and is transparent to everybody. Financial education is very weak in this country, and the financial industry is not going to hire all these people. But the financial industry is in 2020 when we had the virus. Me and everybody like me, oh, let's look at all the viruses we've ever had, and we called them up, and it turned out that no virus had ever caused a major correction in the stock market. Matter of fact, 6 months later, almost all up. But then the president and every potentate around the world came out and said, stop everything now. Those words had never been spoken. And when that happened, 45 million people were out of work within a month, something like that. So the question with me and some others got was, how do you handle this? And there's two ways. And just think about the Enron situation. There's a pink slip on your desk. There's a policeman to walk you out. Here, our company's going down and people have to be let go. There's a right and wrong way to do it with regard to humanity. So when this is happening, it's like we've already thought about where you can go to get new employment. Tomorrow, we're going to have 16 different employers out here that are looking for new people. We've already arranged it for you. There's administrative work that you're going to have to do. We're going to bring people in to help you do it. These are innocent bystanders to a certain extent. And so therefore, we're going to help you with referrals and all those kind of things. But lawyers get in the way of that. And so you can't avoid the right decision. But when you make it, you have to understand that it affects people, that did not create the problem. They're just in the system. And you think about what they're going to need and how you can help them move on. And you spend some resources on that.
There's a lot to unpack there, Britt, and I'm thinking that one thing that would be really helpful would be to double click on some of the key virtues that are implicit in a lot of what you shared. You in your Titans class talk about Ben Franklin's virtues, his 13 virtues that he had. His autobiography is one of my favorite books of all time. A lot of the virtues that he espouses that you teach in your class can apply to these situations, right? If more people more broadly had wisdom, had humility, were curious, had integrity, were honest, we wouldn't have been in that situation to begin with. I'm very much a believer that these core leadership values, integrity, humility, compassion, excellence, they maximize upside. They absolutely maximize upside, and they more obviously minimize the downside risk. Can you speak a little bit to the importance of virtues like wisdom, humility, integrity, excellence? Like, what are the benefits? Why are these important to cultivate? And not just assume that we have them, but to really do the deep work so that when hard times come, we know how to respond with those virtues?
Yeah. So let's just start out by saying that finding what is true and going in that direction is always going to be the right thing. What is true and whatever I believed otherwise, when you find out what is true and you go in that direction, that doesn't mean everything's going to be fantastic all the time, but you're going to go in the right direction. Let's give a silly example here, but it tends to make the point. Is it better to be honest or dishonest in business? Do you have to be dishonest in order to succeed in business? And you know what? I think most people think the answer to that is yes. And so we start believe something that's not true. And so therefore we start behaving in a way that's inconsistent with the truth, which causes us to fail. And so this notion that you have to be deceitful, you have to cheat the system in order to be successful is one of the great deceptions that we have. I mean, I know a lot of the key people at the top of these firms. They're honest, wise, doing the best they can to decide that you're going to act otherwise away from what is the right thing to do in order to succeed. That's probably one of the biggest detriments that people have. There's a Catholic saint that I was reading along that said that to become a saint means to become your true self. And I thought, oh boy, that's not good news because I thought to become a saint meant you had to become Mother Teresa. And then you unpack what is your true self. And I wrote a little piece on that years ago. And I gave it to a friend of mine because we were on a plane together. And I said, I don't want you to read this and give me your thoughts. And we got off at JFK and I asked him about it. And he said, Britt, you know that I can't be successful at fill in the blank if I'm this person. That is the most common belief that there is. I have to be somebody different than the person in my terminology that God created me to be, but in the secular world to succeed. Because that what it meant is he traded off his true self for his false self. And you're not going to be able to operate your highest level in that way. And so once you start thinking that you have to operate some other way besides what you're talking about with integrity, with being honest, caring about other people first before yourself, that in order to beat what happens is people say, everybody's doing this. So therefore I have to do it as much or more to succeed. No, anybody who's doing that is going to eventually, remember that thing about destruction? They're eventually going to crumble. And that's not where you want to go. So job of a leader, again, is to define what is true. First thing a leader does is, what is reality? The reality is everybody has to cheat the system in order to succeed. That is absolutely false. The person who's the most honest, who's the highest integrity, who cares about other people more than the other folks does, who has the wisdom on the motivation to step out, that's the true person. And when you start trying to be something that's less than that person, then take a rocket scientist to figure out you're going to be a less of a person and you're going to achieve less than you would otherwise. And if you do succeed, why do you think people make shows about the Bernie Madoffs and about the scoundrels in the industry? They become books and movies. It's because it's rare, not because it's common. Or you see these movies where all kinds of scandalous things are happening. And I've been on Wall Street for 40 years. I've never seen any of that anywhere. Those are second-rate operations, if that's even true to begin with. But then people start to believe it. And so, as a man thinketh, so he is. Is the way you think consistent with what is true? And the answer is going to be no more often than we'd like to admit. So the person who can get to the most truth and conform their mind and their actions with that truth will be the best leader.
I'm really curious, Britt. What you just shared, for me, it segues into a bit of a question on, call it moral relativism. I was literally just listening to a talk that David Brooks gave. David Brooks is one of my favorite contemporary thinkers and writers, and Road to Character, How to Know a Person. He's just so talented. And in this talk that he just gave at a recent conference, he talked about how we've fallen into this sort of moral relativism trap where we all have to find our own truth, and like how I feel dictates what is right or wrong. You've talked about your Christian worldview. I'd imagine for anyone who subscribes to a Christian worldview, the easy answer for you to how do you know what is right is look to scripture. If you were speaking to somebody without that same POV as you said, what guidance might you give them beyond if it feels right, it is right? Like, how do they avoid that trap if they have a different POV?
Yeah, what you're dealing with is really one of the biggest questions in life. The common ground between everybody, whether they come from a Christian or religious point of view or a secular non-religious point of view, is we all have the same problems. We all have to decide just what is right, what is wrong, what's good, what's bad, what's just, what's unjust. And so I actually say this quite a bit earlier on in my life. And if you go through everything, the first question is, does God exist? Some people say yes, some people say no. It's not smarter or dumber, it's not better or worse, it's just people make different decisions. And so therefore, I happen to be a yes man. And so my source of truth is scripture. And so it doesn't matter how I feel about things. If the way I feel is not consistent with my source of truth, then I lack integrity if I don't conform to the source of truth. And that helps me in terms of deciding what's right or wrong and so on. And I have a lot of great friends who go the other way. And the common ground is, how do you decide what's right or wrong and just right? Eventually you have to make a decision. So maybe it's the culture, maybe it's some other philosophy, maybe it's science, maybe it's tons of different things. Maybe it's just you. I get as much information as I can. And so, as a person of faith, I wouldn't want to do it that way because that sounds unreliable to me. But on the other hand, they wouldn't want to do it my way because they think it's unreliable. But you have to make a decision, and you have to maximize it, and you have to stick with it. Speaking of, I've been married for 44 years. I love my wife. I've never had an affair. What if I were to say, "Well, I feel like having an affair"? I don't. So my wife will watch this. I don't. Let's just imagine that I did. I can't do that because my source of truth says no adultery. It's not how I feel, it's what the source of truth is. If people can name their source of truth and they can show how they're conforming with that source of truth, something external thing, at least we're on the same playing field. But I don't want to be my own source of truth. I know how fragile I can be. And so I recommend my way, but other people recommend other ways. So when you're talking about how to deal with these kind of things, I think the first thing is to recognize you have to have a source of truth. You can't really be a truth seeker if you can't identify what your source of truth is going to be. And whatever that is, you need to be explicit about it. And then you need to live with integrity. And when you get to this moral relativism, everybody kind of understands a little bit of where that's coming from. But there's not 1,000 different versions of truth. And I do not believe that I get to decide what truth is. And I wouldn't want to because I'd be very unreliable. Truth would be whatever makes me happy in the short term. A lot of things that make you think you're make you happy certainly end up undermining your happiness and your effectiveness later on. Going back to that scripture, that's a common view. It's the broad path. It leads to destruction. Stay away from it.
Thanks, Brett. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us and that we can go into some of these deeper topics, right? Like you said, you helped run Bridgewater, right? You helped run Texas Teachers. You've managed over $500 billion. You've had 3 Lifetime Achievement Awards. And we interviewed Howard Marks on this podcast, and you're close with Howard, right? And Ray, you just had lunch with Ray before this conversation. Like you're a legend of investing, and you know that. I'm not saying that to flatter you. I'm saying that to build to a point, which is it really means a lot that we can have you here and have this conversation with you about the much deeper dimensions of our work in finance and investing. I don't get too anxious, but I do worry sometimes that people get so caught up in revenue, in deals, in meetings, in growing the company and getting the next opportunity that we, and myself included sometimes, like we don't slow down to really reflect deeply and do that deep work to reflect on a source of truth, to cultivate wisdom and humility and integrity, courage, virtues that we need as current and future leaders. And knowing that as you've managed hundreds of billions of dollars and been as successful as you are, that you've routinely carved out the time to do that thinking, it's inspirational to me. I hope it's as inspirational to our listeners. And I continue to derive a lot of inspiration for my work as a leader at Scholars of Finance from you. Thank you for having me as I think you said a dignitary at your, is that what you referred to me as at your first Titans class this semester? I was honored to be a dignitary at UT Austin in your Titans class and get to have dinner with your students and see a couple of our Scholars of Finance Austin co-founders in your class, frankly. That was amazing. And I just want to end with a simple question. You said in the beginning of our conversation, you're a big fan of our work at Scholars of Finance. There's obviously a ton of alignment with what you're doing at Titans, but would you be open to maybe sharing with our listeners why you're supportive of our work at Scholars of Finance, what you think of our work here at Scholars of Finance, and why you might encourage others to speak to our students and help mentor the students too?
Let's just do the finance part first. If our financial structure is not working, nothing works. I said earlier, we're not the most important industry, but we're critical to almost every industry. And if the finance industry is not working well, then the country doesn't work well. If the country doesn't work well, and cities and towns and blocks and communities and families don't work well either. One of the reasons that America has become more productive than other people is we have a great financial system that's efficient, that's honest, that's fair. It's not perfect, and there's people in it are not perfect, but overall, it's the best in the world. But what is it for? The finance industry is not here to make us more money. It happens to be an industry where you do get paid more than other people do for the same number of hours, generally speaking. But it's not for us. We're servants of the entire country, and our job is to make sure that capital is allocated fairly to everyone. What we do makes a huge difference in their lives, and it's very important to remember that. And UTIMCO, if you can't afford to go to college at either A&M or UT, but you show that you have the ability to do well in college, you go for free. It's not exclusive, but typically lower income folks would be in that category. And so 100,000 students would get to go to get their college education because we are able to supply the money for it. Your organization, and I just use another example because we manage money for MD Anderson Hospital. And I ask our guys, like, which of you is going to slough off? And therefore, a young mother's not going to be able to go home to parent her daughters, her sons and daughters, to be a wife or a father or whatever. Which one of you is not going to do your part at the best of your ability and have that be the consequence? 2,000 medical trials are partially dependent on us providing the funding. So you guys are the seed corn of the whole operation. If this is one of the reasons I started, I could have, with my idea for students, I could have done something else, but I wanted to go to where people are right at the beginning of their careers. And I've talked about these two different ways. I believe in a path, and I feel like I know them. I don't know everything, but I feel like I know what the path is going to be best for them and best for the country, best for their companies and so on. And that requires that they be trained in that way because it's not training that you're going to get in a typical scenario. And you guys are doing that exact same thing with more people. And so I have a lot of people who support Titans. I'm supporting you because you are doing something that is maximally important to the future of our country. And it starts with every single individual. The folks who get in the program, who fully engage in the program, are going to be the best leaders in the future, and they're going to lead in the right way. And of course, I would support you.
Thanks, Britt. My dream would be that we can become as mature of an organization and experience as Titans is. And 5, 10 years from now, I come and visit the Titans class, and like all of those seniors, all were in Scholars of Finance as freshmen and sophomores. And it's, of course, we're just taking the Scholars of Finance. They've already been doing this kind of work for a couple of years. Let's really go deeper with them.
Yeah, that will happen. It just takes time.
If we do our job, if we can do our job.
Yeah, and you will, and things will come to you that you're not even aware of as time goes by. I do want to just close with one particular thing. The latest thing that I've learned, and it's super powerful, and I should have known this earlier, because most of us are. I'm a true believer in culture, and I believe you have to have a culture that's highly defined and is extreme. And typically, as I go to one company to another, the first thing I'll say, what kind of culture do you want to have? And we'll negotiate and come up with the answer. But I got convicted a few years ago about just one thing, and so I said, I am the CEO, but I'm just going to put it in and see what happens. And so I put in some of this 5 words: speak the truth with love. It happens to be out of the book of Ephesians, but it's only 5 words. And it's the most powerful thing that I ever suggested in terms of culture, and the best received, because it's 3 different things. It's only 5 words, but it's 3 things, and virtually maybe none of us can do all 3 things. The first one is speak. If you have good ideas or you have objections to things, do you tell people? And there's just a huge number of people who are not able to or get their voice in. And so therefore, if they have good ideas, the enterprise never gets to hear them. So those people need to learn how to speak. The second category is the truth. So in our companies, when people are giving a presentation or something, they'll start out with, this is my story, or this is a fact. We want to hear your story, but we don't want to hear your story portrayed as it's a fact, if in fact it's just your story. And then there are people who speak, they can tell the truth, but they can't do it with love, and nobody wants to hear them. And as a convicting thing for me and for everybody, we should ask ourselves, which of these 3 is my problem? I'm always frustrated because I can't get my voice out there, or I won't, or I choose not to. That's probably the biggest area. Do I bend the truth in order to win the day for whatever reason? Or do I tell the truth, I'm just beating my head up against the wall because I don't do it with love? I use that in closing here. I'm the chairman of a group called the San Jacinto Project, and we brought in 100 of the nation's top scientists to work on climate change and the energy transition. The roster was the most elite roster that has been gathered in the United States all at one time, I would say. And it was me and other people that organized this, but I opened the conference, and I'm not a scientist, pretty intimidating for me even, but I opened up and said, we're going to operate according to different rules. And I said, we're going to operate according to these 5 words: speak the truth with love. And if you're sitting here thinking, well, I'm not going to speak because there's more of them than there are of me, forget it, because I'm going to call on you if you don't speak. So we do it the easy way or the hard way. We want to know what you had to say. Number two, you guys are all strong-willed, but you're going to tell us if this is your story or if this is a fact. And if you don't, we're going to stop you and say, is it a story or a fact? We're very interested in your story. We're not interested in your story told us if it's a fact, but in fact, it's just your story. And if you start to be uncivil or just are not courteous, if you're not curious about what other people are saying, and then we're going to correct you. These scientists were there for 2 full days, which is a long time. They're all keynote speakers. At the end of the conference, I went up just to close it out. I closed out in the normal way. Thanks very much. All that kind of thing. Safe travels. I'm walking off the stage. Standing ovation. A standing ovation. And it was not for me for sure. It wasn't even for the content because although it was good, it was for the format. It was for giving them a place where they were encouraged to speak, where there were boundaries that said, don't tell something that's absolutely true if it's just your story. But we're very interested in your story. And when you do speak, and particularly when you listen with civility, with curiosity, with courtesy, and allow people to do the same for you. Standing ovation of America's top scientists. That is a miracle, my friend. That is the answer.
Speak the truth with love. Thanks, Britt. I really appreciate you ending on that powerful note with that powerful reminder. Thank you for speaking the truth with love with me, with our community here at Scholars of Finance. I'll do my best to go and do the same and try to inspire our future leaders to follow in your footsteps. Would love to have you on again in the future. This was really, truly a special conversation, and I have so many more questions than we had time for today, and just want to thank you again.
Ross, obviously, it's a privilege for me to be here. I hope it was helpful, and all of your audience, I hope that they find something useful, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Investing in Integrity by Scholars of Finance. I want to share a huge thank you to our advisors, directors, donors, team, and our members who make this all possible. If you like this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you have any feedback for us, you can send it to hello@scholarsoffinance.org or by visiting our website. Until next time, please join us on our mission to inspire character and integrity in the finance leaders of tomorrow.